Harry Potter, a franchise so many of us know and love, with its endearing and interesting characters, fascinating world, and gripping storytelling, this series has captured the hearts of countless people all across the world. I saw The Philosopher's Stone in theaters when it first came out in 2001 and have been a fan ever since. At some point after seeing Chamber of Secrets, I decided I didn't want to wait to see what happened anymore and began reading the books. They've been a huge part of my life ever since, and I've lost count of the number of times I've read through the whole series. However, reading the books also somewhat changed my perspective on the movies, as I would start going into them with certain expectations of how the story would play out. And especially with the later books, I began to find their corresponding movies lacking in comparison. Now don't get me wrong, I like all of the movies. I don't think any of them are bad. It's just that for most of them, I can't help thinking while watching them about what I'm missing from the book. So because of my passion for the series, I've decided to make a series of videos where I go through each book and movie and discuss the differences between them, some of which I think were detrimental to the story, while others I think were improvements. Also, let me just mention here that all of the things I say in these videos are entirely my own personal opinions. I'm not trying to make any sort of objective judgment on the books or movies, or trying to tell any of you what you should or shouldn't like. These are just my thoughts, and if you disagree with anything, please feel free to tell me in the comments. Just don't be an asshole about it when you do. That's all I ask. So, let's get started on the first book and movie, The Philosopher's Stone, or The Sorcerer's Stone if you live a bit further south from me. These first couple movies have an advantage in that they're adapting the shortest of the books, so it was probably a much easier job to find the things that could be cut or changed for the purpose of the adaptation. As such, I think this movie turned out great. Its biggest job was to introduce us to the world and characters, and I think it did that very well. I definitely have some issues with it, and there are some things I think could have been explained a bit better, but on the whole, I think this was a great adaptation and a great introduction to the series. So the movie opens with Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Hagrid delivering Harry to the Dursleys. However, this was not the case in the book. In the book, we actually start off for about half a chapter following Vernon Dursley as he goes about his day, while also noticing a lot of strange things, like people in odd clothing celebrating, one of them even hugging him, and people talking about the Potter family. As we later learn, they're of course wizards celebrating Voldemort's defeat at the hands of Harry Potter. This opening gives us some insight into Vernon's character, as well as that of the Dursleys in general, and lets us know that there are strange things going on in this world. However, seeing as we learn all of this stuff pretty naturally later, I understand why they cut this. Also, I just think the baby delivery scene makes for a more effective opening for a movie. As for this scene itself, the main difference between the book and movie version is that in the book, Dumbledore and McGonagall talk much more in-depth about what has happened with Voldemort, why he's gone, why people are celebrating, the risks of exposing themselves to muggles, a term we don't even know the meaning of yet, etc. In other words, there's a lot of exposition. In the movie, a lot of this information is left very vague, and Voldemort isn't even mentioned. I actually prefer the way the movie handles this scene because it feels more natural and allows for more intrigue in the first part of the movie as we're left wondering what's going on. This part of the book, at least to me, is an example of explaining too much too early. I think the movie's approach works better here as we get to learn all of this along with Harry, whereas in the book we go through this first part of the story knowing a lot of things he doesn't. Now, in Rowling's defense, I will say, writing exposition in a way that feels natural is not always easy. And I think this is something she actually got better at as the series went on. I'll try to touch on that a bit when I get to the later books. If there's one thing from the book I do wish had been kept in here, it's that Hagrid mentions he borrowed the motorbike from Sirius Black. A nice foreshadowing of a character who'll become important later, and a sign that Rowling had a lot of this planned out from the beginning.
Good luck, Harry Potter.
We're then introduced to our main character, Harry Potter. Now, I've often heard people, especially those who've only seen the movies, say that Harry is a bland, boring protagonist. And I won't act like I don't get why. In both the books and the movies, Harry is a bit of a blank slate, and his personality isn't as colorful as a lot of the other characters we see him interact with. However, I think this is much more of a problem in the movies, because unlike in the books, we aren't having all of Harry's thoughts and feelings narrated to us throughout the story. In the books, having access to all of his thoughts and feelings makes him feel more three-dimensional. It allows us to understand him, relate to him, sympathize with him, because we know exactly what he's going through and how he feels about certain people and situations. This inner dialogue also exposes us to more of his flaws, as we occasionally see him thinking rather nasty thoughts about people, even sometimes his closest friends. Even though book Harry and movie Harry are more or less the same character and do the same things, having that inner dialogue really does make a difference. I guess I should also talk about Daniel Radcliffe here. First I'll say, I really like that they didn't go with famous child actors to play the children. Casting unknown actors in these parts means we can identify these kids as the actual characters, as opposed to other characters the actor may have played. As for Radcliffe, I think he's fine. He's certainly not bad, but I can't think of any point in these movies where I thought he was amazing. That said, I do think he gets better as the films go on, and as I mentioned, Harry isn't the most dynamic character to play, so I don't know if I can fully blame Radcliffe for not particularly standing out. So now we meet the Dursley family. The movie does a really good job getting across how much Harry's life with them sucks, and how almost cartoonishly nasty they are. Richard Griffiths, Fiona Shaw, and Harry Melling are fantastic in these roles.
Any funny business, any at all, and you won't have any meals for a week.
I was the only one to see her for what she was. A freak.
36, but last year I had 37!
Sadly, as the movies go on, the Dursleys' screen time in each one is significantly cut down. I guess I get why, as they're not the most important characters, but I do think they were ultimately done a bit of a disservice. Now, in the book, we're actually told about some events in Harry's life prior to this that hint at his magical abilities, like his hair instantly growing back after being cut, and suddenly ending up on the roof of the school while being chased by Dudley's gang. I like how these moments give an idea of how people's magical abilities develop, but in a more concise form like a movie, yeah, they really aren't necessary. The one thing I do wish they had mentioned in the movie was Mrs. Fig, an old cat-loving lady who the Dursleys would often leave Harry with whenever they went out somewhere, just to establish her character at least a little bit before Order of the Phoenix, where we learn she's actually a squib who Dumbledore assigned to keep an eye on Harry growing up. So, because Mrs. Fig broke her leg and they have nowhere else to leave him, the Dursleys take Harry to the zoo with them on Dudley's birthday. Again, the movie did this part well. The only real differences between the movie and the book here are that in the book, one of Dudley's friends, Pierce Polkiss, comes with them. And also, unlike in the movie, Dudley doesn't fall into the snake's cage when the glass disappears. He and Pierce simply jump back in shock. For the sake of the movie, though, having him fall in is funnier. Harry then starts receiving the letters from Hogwarts. In the book, we see much more of the lengths the Dursleys go to keep them from Harry. In fact, this is the reason they move Harry to Dudley's second bedroom.
Purely out of the goodness of our hearts.
No, it wasn't. It was to keep the letters from getting to him. Even after they leave, after the flood of letters, they don't go straight to the shack on the rock. They go to a hotel first, and it's only after the letters still find them there that they go to the shack. Again, though, this ultimately isn't necessary for the movie. Also, I just want to say, I love Richard Griffiths in this part. From the way he grins at Harry while burning his letters, to his glee over there being no post on Sundays.
No post on Sunday. Ha! No blasted letters today! No, sir! Not one single bloody letter! Not one!
So Hagrid then arrives at the shack to pick Harry up. I can't imagine a more perfect Hagrid than Robbie Coltrane. He embodies the immense warmth of the character and can also be extremely intimidating when someone incurs his wrath. One thing I kinda wish the movie had kept was Hagrid's shock and anger over learning that the Dursleys told Harry nothing about the wizarding world. In the movie, he doesn't even seem surprised by this, but in the book, he explodes on the Dursleys. You never told him?
never told him what was in the letter Dumbledore left for him? I was there! I saw Dumbledore leave it, Dursley, and you've kept it from him all these years?
Now, with that said, one thing I actually do like better in the movie is the moment where Hagrid threatens Vernon for insulting Dumbledore. In the book, this line is written all in capital letters because he's shouting it. However, I actually prefer the soft, threatening tone he uses in the movie.
Never insult Albus Dumbledore in front of me.
However, one moment I do think would have benefited from more volume is Petunia's outburst, as it could have gotten across a bit more just how much Petunia was holding this in all this time. It even says in the book that it sounded like she had been wanting to say all this for years. Fiona Shaw does play this really well, though, and we do get at least a bit of a sense that a lot of her anger towards her sister really stems from jealousy. Now, the other thing to mention here is that in the book, it's in this scene where Hagrid tells Harry about Voldemort and how his parents died. Again, I actually prefer the movie's approach in spacing these things out more. This scene is about Harry and us learning that he's a wizard and about the wizarding world in general. That's already a lot of information to dump on us. Save the Voldemort story for later after we've taken all of this in a bit more. And I don't think it's out of character for Hagrid to not want to talk about it, at least until Harry insists. So Harry and Hagrid leave for Diagon Alley. In the book, Harry learns a bit more about the wizarding world along the way, like about the Ministry of Magic, Gringotts, etc. Since this is all stuff we inevitably learn about anyway, I think it was fine to cut. Though there are two bits of info about Hagrid I do kind of wish the movie had told us here. First is the fact that he was expelled from Hogwarts, which foreshadows some things in Chamber of Secrets where we learn why. And second is his desire to have a dragon, which of course foreshadows Norbert. There is actually a deleted scene where the latter is mentioned.
Crikey, I love a dragon.
You'd like a dragon?
Vastly misunderstood beasts, Harry. Vastly misunderstood.
At the Leaky Cauldron, things play out mostly the same in both versions, with people enthusiastically greeting Harry. The only major difference is Quirrell. In the movie, Quirrell is already wearing his turban, suggesting he's already being possessed by Voldemort, and he actively avoids shaking Harry's hand. Which doesn't really make sense, as judging from his reaction at the end, he had no idea what would happen if he did. In the book, Quirrell isn't yet being possessed by Voldemort, and as such is able to shake Harry's hand without anything happening. Don't get me wrong, he is working for Voldemort. I mean, the whole reason he's here is to try to steal the stone from Gringotts. But Voldemort only started possessing him after his failure to do so, as a means of punishing and keeping a closer watch on him. Also, Quirrell is actually much younger in the book, like mid-20s, but that's not really important. So Harry and Hagrid enter Diagon Alley. The stuff in Gringotts is pretty much the same in both versions. However, after that, while the movie skips right to Ollivander's, in the book we see more of Harry buying his school materials. Oh, and just a fun little fact, one of the books Harry needs to buy for school is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander. In the book, we see Harry buy his school clothes at Madame Malkin's, and this is actually where he meets Draco Malfoy for the first time, though neither of them know who the other is. Malfoy acts a bit snobbish and uninterested, but not outright mean, and mentions things like Quidditch, Hogwarts houses, and how he doesn't think people from Muggle families should be allowed into Hogwarts. While I did like this part in the book, I understand why they decided to cut it from the movie, as both Malfoy and the things he's talking about can be saved for later. One other slight difference here is that in the book, Hagrid and Harry buy Hedwig together before going to Ollivander's together. Whereas in the movie, Hagrid decides to surprise Harry with her while he goes to Ollivander's alone. As for the scene at Ollivander's, I loved it. Of course, there's the famous imagery when Harry finds the right wand, but what really makes this scene is John Hurt. It may be a small role, but he was the perfect choice to play Ollivander. I just love his voice and the way he delivers his lines here.
I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter, when its brother gave you that scar. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. We can expect great things from you. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible. Yes, but great.
Now, of course, it's at this point in the movie where Hagrid tells Harry about Voldemort and how his parents died. As I said before, I prefer the movie's approach to all this, spacing this information out rather than dumping it on us all at once. I will say, though, one thing I don't think the movies did very well was getting across just how well respected Harry's parents were in the wizarding world. I wouldn't be surprised if some non-readers thought they were just some innocent civilian family, but they weren't. They were actually heavily involved in the fight against Voldemort and were a major thorn in his side for years before he went to kill them. Now, at this point, the movie jumps straight to King's Cross Station. In the book, however, it's a bit different. In fact, Hagrid doesn't even bring Harry to the station. You see, there's still a whole month to go before the school year starts, so Hagrid sends Harry back to the Dursleys for that month, during which Vernon and Petunia pretty much ignore him, and Dudley is terrified of him. It's the Dursleys who then take Harry to the station and pretty much ditch him there. I do understand why they skipped this in the movie, but it does seem weird that Hagrid would just abandon him there. Oh, and one other thing they mention in the book is that the Dursleys were taking Dudley to get his pigtail removed. The movies never say this, so no, he didn't keep that. In both versions, Harry makes it onto platform 9 3/4 with the help of the Weasleys. The movie does a good job of showing Mrs. Weasley's kind nature and the twins' mischievous nature.
He's not Fred, I am. Honestly, woman, you call yourself our mother.
Oh, I'm sorry, George.
I'm only joking. I am Fred.
After Harry arrives on platform 9 3/4, in the movie we cut right to Harry on the train, which has already started moving. In the book, though, there are a couple things that happen as Harry is getting on the train. First of all, we catch our first glimpse of Neville here with his overbearing grandmother complaining about losing his toad. Harry is also helped onto the train by Fred and George Weasley, who see his scar and figure out who he is. After getting into his compartment, Harry sees the twins telling their family who he is. Mrs. Weasley expresses sympathy for Harry, and Ginny excitedly wants to meet him. The twins and Ron then say goodbye and board the train. All pretty cuttable stuff, since we're going to get to know these characters pretty well over the course of the books anyway. Though there is one bit that, while not necessary, I think would have been kind of funny. Mrs. Weasley warns the twins that she doesn't want to get any letters about them blowing up a toilet seat or anything, to which they reply that they've never blown up a toilet, but they thank her for the idea. Then, when Ginny is crying about not getting to go, the twins jokingly promise to send her a toilet seat to cheer her up. By itself, this moment seems like Fred and George just joking around, but there's actually a payoff at the end of the book when Harry wakes up in the hospital wing and sees the gifts from his admirers.
I believe your friends, Mr. Fred and George Weasley, were responsible for trying to send you a lavatory seat.
Again, I'm not upset they cut this stuff, I just thought it was a funny moment. Although actually, I will say that while I agree with cutting these moments, they do show us a bit of something that I don't think we see quite enough of in the movie, and that is Harry's insecurity. I think this comes down to what I said earlier, about the lack of inner dialogue taking away from his character. In the book, while he is happy about leaving the Dursleys, he also has a lot of self-doubt. Like, he mentions to Ron on the train that he thinks he'll be the worst in class, and once he gets to Hogwarts, he panics internally about whether he'll make it into any of the houses, and keeps imagining scenarios in which he's rejected from the school. In the movie, we see no sign that he has any doubts at all about his abilities. He even grins while showing Ron his scar, like he enjoys showing it off. Speaking of Ron, we're officially introduced to him here as he joins Harry in his compartment. I love Rupert Grint in this role. He plays the part well, and his expressions are just priceless. That said, I might as well say right now that one of my main problems with the movies is that I don't think they totally did Ron justice. The book gives us a real sense of Ron's insecurity, both due to his family's poverty, as well as having 5 older brothers who have all been very successful. As such, he has a bit of an inferiority complex and feels like he has a lot to live up to. We don't get this quite as much in the movie. I feel like they made him more of a comic relief character and kind of went overboard in making him dumb and goofy.
Whew! Lucky we didn't panic.
So anyway, we also meet Hermione. She doesn't exactly endear herself to Harry and Ron by acting bossy and annoying. Ron in particular takes a pretty instant dislike to her. I think Emma Watson does a decent job as Hermione. I don't think she's fantastic or anything, but she pulls it off well enough. Now, with that said, I do have my issues with how Hermione is portrayed in the movies, and it's kind of the opposite problem I have with Ron. Scriptwriter Steve Kloves has said that Hermione is his favorite character in the books, and let's just say you can tell. I won't go any more into this yet. Honestly, you don't see much of it in this movie, but it is definitely something that is noticeable as the series goes on, and I will talk about it whenever I feel it's appropriate. Moving on, there were a number of things cut from the train ride, most of which I understand. For example, Harry and Ron meet Neville here as he comes to their compartment looking for his toad. Also, aside from when he and Harry interacted at Madame Malkin's, this is where we officially meet Draco Malfoy in the book, along with Crabbe and Goyle, as they come to the compartment to meet the famous Harry Potter. The movie moved this scene to the entrance hall at Hogwarts. There is one funny moment from this part that wasn't in the book, though. When Goyle tries to take some of Harry and Ron's sweets, Scabbers jumps up and bites his finger. Probably the only good thing Peter Pettigrew ever did. Let me also just say, Tom Felton does a great job as Malfoy. He's so good at displaying that sneering sense of superiority that I genuinely want to punch him in the face half the time he's on screen. One interesting little detail in the book is that after opening the chocolate frog, Harry reads the back of the Dumbledore card he got. On this card is mentioned Dumbledore's work in alchemy with Nicholas Flamel, planting a seed for Harry to remember later. It also mentions Dumbledore's defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald, a very important figure in the history of the wizarding world as well as Dumbledore's own past, and someone we learn a lot more about in both Deathly Hallows and the Fantastic Beasts films.